First, I'm going to start off by asking Charles Clover, the renowned marine conservationist, author, environmentalist, and co-founder of Blue Marine Foundation, to introduce the NGO, saying very clearly, however, that there are several NGOs who are involved with this campaign, and I will introduce each speaker in sequence of their remarks. But first, Charles, please go ahead. Tell us about what is the mission and the founding mission of Blue Marine Foundation.
Okay, so we were set up 14 years ago to combat overfishing and to try and get some marine protected areas, some working marine protected areas in UK waters and in waters around the world. And one of our great successes, all successes in environmental campaigns, are achieved with other players, other parties. We were a linchpin, though, I think, in the creation of the Blue Belt, which is the creation of marine protected areas around the British overseas territories. And then, when Brexit happened, Tom, our legal advisor, and I got together and thought, well, what can we get out of this? And we thought, well, we can get the marine protected areas that were created in British waters, but are not enforced because the EU doesn't allow fishing to be pushed out of them. Now we're able to do this ourselves. Why don't we actually enforce our marine protected areas? And we had that battle about the Dogger Bank, and we won.
Okay, and on that note, we're actually going to screen a film to give you a brief introduction to Dogger Bank before we proceed with the discussion. Okay, we're going to dim the lights, and there will be a short pause before it fills the screen. Oh, no, I told everybody there's going to be an 8 to 10 second pause here. It'll be fine. We're using the cinema equipment. Is it on?
In the 1950s, every school child knew that the Dogger Bank was where fishermen went to catch fish. They used to catch, 1 ton of halibut a day, a single boat. And now the entire fleet catches 2 tons of halibut in a year. There's a serious reason why there aren't the cod, the whiting, the haddock that used to be there, which traditionally we used to fish for. And that's because the habitat that supported them is not there to the same extent as it was in the past. This expedition was organized to find out whether there was any habitat worth saving on the Dogger Bank. The Dogger Bank is the largest marine protected area in the UK, and it was also the first offshore marine protected area that got legally enforced, and therefore it is obviously incredibly important. The human activities currently threatening the Dogger Bank are any return of fishing, which has not been entirely banned, and we do need to think about oil and gas and wind farms that are coming in to fill the void.
Ja, dat er een beetje... Whoa, an enemy!
When we put the camera down this week, I was pretty surprised at how much diversity, how many rich places there were left. There were little scurrying crabs and hermit crabs and all sorts of things. But there were dead men's fingers, which are actually soft coral. There were either ray or shark egg sacs attached to things. It was very heartening to see how much life there was on the seabed. But nobody has really looked at what the developers are actually doing to the seabed and on the seabed, and how long that's going to take to recover. My vision, and I hope many other people's vision for the Dogger Bank, is for the fish to come back. My message to the government was think very carefully about whether you really need to put oil and gas development into a protected area like the Dogger Bank, because there are other areas. I know we all need some energy, and we all need a lot more wind energy. But if you're protecting it, why simultaneously try to destroy it? That I don't understand. And I don't think they understand it either. The key takeaway from this Dogger Bank expedition is definitely there's more life out there than we really thought. A lot of it's been damaged, but it's all there in some fragmented form. We just need to give it time to recover.
Okay, so we're going to start by laying the groundwork for the discussion by discussing, defining what is a marine protected area first. And I'm going to just state that there are 371 marine protected areas covering 38% of UK seas. And I'm going to ask Tom Appleby, the Chief Legal Officer of the Blue Marine Foundation and Associate Professor of Property Law, who's tasked with basically spearheading litigation on behalf of Blue Marine Foundation. How is a marine protected area designated? What's the process and what is it?
Yeah, so basically we had two processes, one under European law and one under UK law. And what that meant was there was a kind of list of habitats and species which were important. We went around the country and we designated areas in which those species and habitats locate. So you get these big areas on maps, but what all they're doing is protecting certain habitats within them, which is kind of the first problem.
Are you saying that Blue actually proposes to designate them, or who actually decides on that?
This is done at a kind of nationwide level, so it'll be put forward by Natural England or nature conservation bodies.
Okay.
And so that's happened over a period of time. And some of them have got, like the Dogger Bank, nearly all of the Dogger Bank is a protected habitat. Whereas in some, you'll just find there'll be a small area of the location of protected habitat. That's all that's really protected within that space. So we make these grandiose claims of over 30%, but actually the areas within them that are protected are much smaller than that. And so that's the designation process. And then you've got the issue of how they're protected, which is normally during the licensing process. So a developer comes along, they want to put their development in, they do their marine license, and they then have to look at whether or not they're impacting on those sites. Now, the European designation is important because unless you're doing something really important at overriding reasons of public interest, like an energy project, you won't be able to put something in if it impacts on the protected site. Whereas the UK one, you just have to, the UK designations are much weaker. You just have to take it into consideration during the planning process so they can then override them.
Okay.
The importance of the Dogger is
the burden is on the developer, if you're in the EU, to demonstrate some special need. The default is protection of the area as a given.
Yeah, absolutely, okay. Absolutely. And you can only do it, if you cause a problem, you can only then go ahead if you've got a really important project for the European sites.
Yep. And
the Dogger is protected under formerly EU legislation, which is now just obviously all domestic since Brexit. The other problem with that was until Brexit happened, the common fisheries policy meant that sites that were offshore, which is outside the 12 nautical mile limit, they fell into this thing where there was a process under the common fisheries policy, which meant they all sat down and just talked round and round and round and filibustered effectively any measures happening. So on paper, it looks like it applies, but actually it meant that these things had no impact on fishing at all.
Okay.
Which was the most destructive activity?
Yeah, by
far.
Right.
Yeah.
So actually, even though it sounds like a vast territory is protected, the protection is largely toothless, and that marine protected areas are unfortunately very frequently termed paper parks.
Yeah.
Charles, why don't you elaborate? Please both elaborate on that. And in fact, that bottom trawling actually tripled after Dogger Bank was designated a marine protected area because, or was it was after Brexit, was it due to Brexit that happened? That actually fishing increased after
Well, that's an
designation.
interesting thing that happened. I think it's like, if you if you say you're going to prevent meadows being ploughed, farmers start ploughing the meadows like crazy. So I think it's a bit like that. There is this historic conflict in European law between the habitats regulations and the common fisheries policy. The habitats regulations sit with the member states. The common fisheries policy sits with the Commission, which thinks it's more important than everybody else. And so the member states cannot prohibit the Commission allowing fishing in your area. So this was a historic conflict. It's been going on for 40 years. They still haven't bloody sorted it out. It's one of the great reasons why actually Brexit's good for the sea, because we've been able to try and sort some of this stuff out. As you'll see, we are also suing our government for behaving like the European Union and allowing the harvesting of fish above scientific advice. Incidentally, we're doing that at the moment as well, because Brexit's given us this great opportunity to rectify some of the things that have historically been going wrong in our seas, in our marine protected areas.
Tom, actually explain this crucial juridical change in the wake of Brexit, that for the first time it was possible to sue the government for an environmental violation, because that's critical to your campaign and to environmentalism in general.
Yeah, I mean, the European law is quite interesting in that the Commission, it's slightly easier now, but the Commission is, you and I can't sue the Commission for not doing, for the Commission processes for not working. Under UK law, we've got judicial review. So if the government breaches its own rules, interested parties like Blue Marine can take legal action against the UK government.
As we nearly did over the Dogger Bank.
Yeah, as we nearly
did. Or we just forced them into it and they conceded. Whether they will over the fish, I don't know.
And so we've got that, and so we were very, when Brexit happened, we kind of went into a room and we tried to work out what it meant.
Yeah, and
no, because everyone had an emotional reaction to it, but ours was, hang on, this is what's happening, let's just see what it means on paper. And to some extent, no one knew what was going to happen because we hadn't done the research that well in advance. And it turns out that once we left the common fisheries policy, this exemption fell away. The UK then had to comply with the Habitats Directive as far as fisheries were concerned, which opened the door to us suing the UK. And first of all, we were very nice to ministers. We first of all told them that's what we were going to do. They didn't do anything about it. And then we got nastier and nastier and nastier until we were on the verge, literally, of pressing the button to send the
proceedings,
send the legal proceedings, and they settled.
I want to ask you an important legal question which applies beyond the scope of this discussion. Was that threatened litigation, or has there been a lawsuit after Brexit which took advantage of this cause of action, not necessarily the law of the sea, or not just in a marine context, because you did this with Client Earth, this threatened litigation? What is the landscape of that? Because I think it's very important going forward.
They settled before we could. So they settled. It happened that we threatened judicial review. Our advice was
Sure. But do you know if it's happened with fossil fuel development or any other? I'm sorry, I just ambushed him with that question.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure if there has, because the specifics on this, the common fisheries policy was so odd in the way that works. Other industries don't necessarily have that. Brexit landed unevenly, and other industries don't necessarily have that problem.
But I think we need to go back one step, because we were already campaigning with groups like Emilie's about the preservation of this marine protected area that had been created, the proper enforcement thereof. And we have been working a lot on both sides of the North Sea.
Yeah.
Emily's been trying to get the Dutch, the Germans, the delinquent Danes to these are good, to actually enforce this protection of this very important area. And we are continuing to support, and they are supporting us. A lot of the science that we used was Emilie's science. So the environmentalists are treating the sea as a whole. The governments are all over the place.
Yeah, and we had, at the same time, with Emilie's group and Client Earth and Brussels and various others, We also were tracking a very, very slow approach through the EU, through the complaints process, which you can use, but they kind of speak Entish in the...
Okay.
Entish.
Also, I want to take a moment to introduce Emilie Reuchlin, and she's a marine biologist, and she co-founded the Doggerland Foundation, which is essentially the counterpart to Blue Marine Foundation insofar as its campaign in the North Sea is concerned to ensure compliance with legal and international legal conservation obligations. But, okay, now, before we get into the campaign, which, as Tom said, was essentially successful to protect the UK portion of Dogger Bank, I want to also give the floor to an incredibly eminent scientist? Archaeologist. Sorry. Landscape archaeologist, Professor Vincent Gaffney, who's the anniversary chair in landscape archaeology at the Department of Archaeological and Forensic Sciences at the University of Bradford. I just wanted to say a word. He's literally one of the world's top experts on this matter. And what is landscape archaeology? It's the study of the ways in which people in the past constructed and used the environment around them. So he's also been involved in a lot of important projects, including, oh my God, Stonehenge. That's just one of them. And on that note, I want Vincent to tell us the significance, the archaeological significance of Dogger Bank. And we're going to give you a brief exposition generally of why Dogger Bank is so important. Next slide. The one after that. Yes, this is okay. Vincent, I don't know. I hope you can see your slide.
Good enough.
But please tell us about the Paleolithic era.
When I was asked to talk about this, you actually said something about the geology. Well, geology, I'm not a geologist. But, so there's two ways to look at this. The easy way and the substantive way. The easy way is the Dogger Bank is a remnant of a glacial moraine, upthrust by the glaciers, pushing up areas which are into form topographic highs, now marine highs, and that's the easy bit. The substantive way is to point out to the Brits here that we are rather smug in our view of the world. We're an island race, and we sit there proud in the ocean, a jewel amongst all islands. Well, of course, the fact is that for most of the geological and archaeological periods, we were just Epoxy Peninsula on the edge of Europe, right? You've got to find your place in the world. Yeah. Now, we are only an island on occasions. Seas rise, empires fall, as they say. I went to Hamilton recently. That's where it came from. And during this period, for the last about 800,000 years, people have actually been living in this area. But Britain has been a peninsula and occasionally an island throughout this period. There's a number of things that I'm going to say about it. And particularly in the last 22,000 years after the last glacial, which is the period I'm particularly bothered with, which is prior to this, the sea was about 120 meters lower than it is today. Britain was one of these peninsulas. It's only in the period from about 18,000 BC to about 5,000 BC that the world emerged as we know it. The land changed. The entire face of the world changed. We lost about 20% of the surface area of Europe as the seas rose. Britain became an island. The world shape that we know emerged. The environment changed. At the beginning of that period, we were looking at tundra-like landscapes in the northwestern Europe. We went through a period into grassland, the emergence of grassland, then birch forests into pines, and eventually to the temperate landscapes we know today. And at this point, of course, I'm going to offend 75% of people in the audience, the economy changed. Farming is just a flash in the pan in this period. You know, we were hunter-gatherers and fishers long before we were farmers. And it's actually only as island Britain emerges that farming is introduced in Northwest Europe. So the entire nature of the world changed during this period. It is substantive. Now, why is it important? Many people would have thought 20 years ago this wasn't even significant. But the fact is that the biggest chunks of habitable land, the most desirable chunks of habitable land, were on the great coastal plains, which have now been lost. And we have forgotten this. We had largely forgotten this. Even 25 years ago, most archaeologists going over this, from on the holiday over to even Denmark, would have just looked over the side of the boat and said, well, there's nothing there to see. But in fact, for the past 200 years, we've had some degree of knowledge about these areas, largely because of fishing. Now, in the 19th century, particularly with the growth of trains and the railways, which allowed fish to be moved very dramatically, there was a vast expansion of fishing in the North Sea. Trawling emerged, the big beam trawlers, though we'd had beam trawling for a long time in some senses. Fleeting, which allowed the fleets to stay out for much longer in the North Sea, emerged. And the scraping of the seabed, along with a mania for collection during this period, generally, of course, eminent reverends with very little to do with their time, meant that fossil material was coming up from the southern North Sea. People were collecting it. We had, in 1931, probably the most famous find, which is a single antler point, a part of a fishing spear called the Lemanendua point, which was being dragged up by the Kalinda, a trawler called the Kalinda. The captain obviously thought he'd found something valuable because he pulled up a block of peat about 1 meter square and found this thing in the centre and tried to sell it to the British Museum, who said, we've got 6 already, actually. But that, for about a century, was pretty much the only real evidence we had for human activity in these areas. And we largely forgot about this. We largely forgot about this area until in at the late 90s, the beginning of the noughties, people started to take an interest in this again. And part of the reason for this was almost certainly the development of energy exploitation in the North Sea. Gas, oil, huge amounts of surveying were taking place. We suddenly realized that there was an opportunity to look at this landscape for the first time ever. Seismic surveys over huge areas, were made available for the first time by the energy companies. Archaeologists could never have afforded to do this sort of thing. It cost about $1 billion to do most of the surveys in the North Sea. But we were about 20 odd years ago, allowed to look at these areas for the first time. And what did we find? I started working with some basin geomorphologists, a guy called Ken Thompson, and within 2 weeks, we found a river on top of the Dogger Bank. First time that had been seen since people walked along it about 18,000 years ago. So suddenly we were starting to realize that we were exploring the last great unexplored regions of the world. These were, for the first time, you could start naming rivers. This is a remarkable experience. And over the last 15 years or so, I and a large number of other people have started to pull this evidence together. We've actually started mapping an area of 180,000 square kilometres of prehistoric landscape underneath the southern North Sea and associated with the Dogger Bank. But there is something very important about this. We have produced a map It's wonderful. It's got hills, it's got rivers, it's got marshes, it's got all the coastlines, all the things you'd expect on a map. But it doesn't have people. It is a fact that even today, globally, there is not one single archaeological site that has been found directly in the deeper parts of the coastal shelves. Not one, not even now do we have that. Everything has been generally found by chance. And that is the current situation. But we're faced with an existential dilemma now, because we're starting to see major redevelopment on the coastal shelves again at a global level. China and actually the UK have pushed wind farm development. They're the two major areas. But this is going to be a global change. We know it is. But at this point, probably by the 2030s, which is the end of the ocean decade, we're going to see large chunks of these landscapes actually put out of our reach. We won't be able to get access to them because of development, even before we've begun to understand them. So we're really at a crisis point at this moment, and it all ties together with development. Fishing is still inherently part of this. Don't have time to go too much into that at the moment. But that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, no, that's exciting. But okay, let me also ask you something that's incredibly fascinating. Okay, now, you did cite the statistic that not a single find has actually been made. So if it was to be preserved for your excavation, what is the possibility and the budget that would be required in order to actually make a find?
God. If I had all the money in the world. I mean, the first thing we've got to do is actually to find a methodology to actually carry out this work. It is not the fact that archaeological work has not been carried out in these areas. Whenever there is major development, particularly on the British side, with the Crown Estate licensing, archaeological work has to take place. But clearly it isn't working. It's methodologies which are, the British always fight the last war famously, but and that's what we're doing archaeologically. We're using the sort of methods we use on land, but it's different. At sea it is different. We have to find areas where people lived, where things are preserved, and where we can get access to them. Up on the Dogger Bank itself, you might have 15 meters of sand or more on top of it.
So have you devised this method?
We think we have. We think we've got a method now. We call it the Goldilocks zone, which we stole from our astronomy, obviously. That's what archaeologists do. We just nick ideas. But, if you get that Venn diagram together, you can start to work it. We've got to use all the seismic data. We've got to use AI because of the areas that we're looking at in order to find these areas that we can work in. Once we can work in, we can find our place, because archaeology as ecology is an important part of this. We are part of nature, the natural environment, and we have to fit ourselves into the general issues and ecological terms that are being discussed in other parts of this panel.
Okay, so we have reason to be hopeful.
1, 2, 3.
A successful find can be achieved. Emilie, I'm going to ask you as a marine biologist, as well as Charles, also to tell us about the ecological significance of Dogger Bank.
So the Dogger Bank, despite its severely degraded state, because it's been degraded for centuries, still harbors a lot of diversity. And because of the way it's positioned in kind of the heart of the North Sea, and also because of its properties of being a sandbank, it's where water masses from the Channel and the Atlantic meet. And so it's a very productive area. And so as we go there, and I've this expedition that we organize, and many expeditions in the past, is to look at the area and to look at what we're left to work with. And if you dive underwater and you know where to go, it's a marvelous world. So what we see is octopus, we see shark and ray eggs, and so we know it's still being used despite being degraded. It's still a spawning ground for cod, for mackerel, for whiting, sharks, rays. We find octopus on the wrecks that are unfished largely. It's a nursery and feeding ground for minke whales, for harbour porpoise, for grey seals. You've got the gannets coming in to feed on the sand eel. There's puffins there. So it's teeming with life, but in certain pockets that are left untouched. And so what we set out to do on these expeditions is to look at, if we are to rewild the Dogger Bank, which is with the foundation, which is called Doggerland, because we thought this area that Vincent is discovering is quite representative of, you know, our plight as human species, having to live in this natural surroundings, at peace with our natural surroundings, and you know, our vulnerability as a human species when the floods come in, or when, you know, climate change is happening. So it's representative, and I think the Dogger Bank has a lot of potential to become an engine for ecosystem restoration at North Sea level if we get it right. It can create a very interesting legal precedent, but also a restoration precedent. So there used to be, for example, large shellfish reef, and the shellfish reefs are what are the tropical, you know, reefs in is what we have. We have shellfish reefs, so it's a hotspot of biodiversity. We used to have many shellfish reefs on the Dogger Bank, horse mussel reefs, and we are hoping to. I think the best thing in rewilding is what you can do is to leave the area to restore itself. That's the best investment that we can do, because nature is really good at, you know, restoring itself. But then for the species and the habitats that have been so degraded that they cannot return by themselves, things like horse mussel reefs, things like gravel bats that we've fished up, we can go in and we can restore those. And that's something that we've been researching for many years now, and so if we get it right, you know, the Dogger Bank can become an amazing legal precedent because we're doing the legal procedures, but that's kind of like making sure we hold governments accountable to do the bare minimum that they should be doing. But what we also can do is to raise the ambition of our governments and you know, anybody working in the North Sea to show. But this is what it could become if we allow the Dogger Bank to be restored. If we are allowed access inside this protected area to restore it, which sounds ridiculous by itself, if we are allowed to restore this protected area, then it serves to tackle the twin crises that we're faced with as humanity, the climate change crisis and the biodiversity crisis. Because of the peat that Vincent's talking about, I mean, peat is carbon gold. If you drag it up, I mean, that's a major climate change impact that we don't want.
But you've mentioned legal precedent several times. I mean,
yes.
I want to understand the basis on which you're going to sue the EU courts and how it differs from what was done in the UK.
We don't. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold our Dutch government accountable for upholding the Habitats Directive, the Birds and the Habitats Directive. So those are the key legislation to protect the area. And to properly manage the area so that nature is allowed to be protected.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is when we were rummaging around in the kind of legal basement with Brexit, we also discovered that the loophole the common fisheries policy had wasn't as big a loophole as they thought. But a lot of this is about established practice. And the member state in particular still had an obligation over the common fisheries policy to introduce measures against fishing at a member state level. And so
they're not doing it.
They're not doing it.
We have this long-winded complaint,
so
which we're jointly
we're working across the border. So when this work happened from the UK side to make sure that trawling was no longer able to degrade the area, we pushed on the EU side, and so we worked across the North Sea to get this, and now we need to use this momentum and this lever to make sure that we do the same thing in the Netherlands and in Germany, is to protect 100% of this protected area, not just a subset of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not just fisheries, it's also wind energy.
I want to ask a very common
issue.
sense question.
Yeah.
What type of showing needs to be made that certain species which are in jeopardy of extinction have been depleted to a near non-replacement level? I mean, I want to understand, like, there's the brass tacks of, it's enough, it doesn't say that much to the general audience. Like, what does it take to get a government to enforce? Is the burden on NGOs to make a scientific showing? How does that actually work?
I think what's happening here is that there's lots of legislation. We're not sure it's being enforced. We're not sure it's very good. So what we're doing is something very simple. We're just going there and bearing witness to what is there.
Yeah. But
Now, there could be much more there. There is a government initiative in UK for something called net gain. So if you go there and you damage something a little bit, you have to actually put back more than just rectifying that thing. You have to talk about it, the whole ecosystem. You have to put back more than you take away. So that is an enormously hopeful moment, but we haven't actually done it yet. What we're coping with at the moment are these developments that were authorized about a decade ago, and which didn't do anything for restoration, which just are there, and which are probably enhancing scouring effects and all sorts of things. They're probably going to prevent archaeologists getting in there. They're probably going to prevent ecologists restoring an MPA. That's the paradox. We've created a conflict between two things. That's the bad side, but the good side is that people are trying to get net gain. So we want some net gain. There is a great opportunity. We want to talk about it. There is shed loads of money going out there, and shed loads of money should be used in compensation to create restoration.
But before we compensate, I really feel like there's going to be wind energy because it has been consented. But the UK government now is looking to expand wind energy even more. And this is going into prime restoration areas that we've discovered that we should be building on, and not building wind farms on, but allowing nature to build, to expand those hotspots of biodiversity. And we will be pushed out as conservationists from the protected area to do our restoration work.
Can I just come in here and point out that heritage has even less protection?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Once you go beyond the territorial and contiguous areas of the land, that's 24 nautical miles, down to what's called the area, which is the deep sea. There is no protection in British terms. We haven't signed up to the 2001 convention, the UNESCO convention. Everything is being done. The only protection is what is demanded by the license, the developmental license, and there is nothing else. There is nothing else. So whilst the natural environment is moving at a certain level, we're decades behind. Even we have no protection.
And we need wind energy. We need clean energy. We also need to be honest about it may not be fully clean, but we need to be very, very smart about what we do in terms of spatial planning. Right now, it's about lowest cost, and it's about where there's not a lot of hindrance from other sectors. That's where we'll put the wind parks. But it might not be the smartest to put wind parks inside protected areas, because you could put them elsewhere. And those are the very few areas where we can allow nature to be restored and to do something for the entire ecosystem. That's the whole point of this protected area network that we thought of.
I mean, the important thing with Dogger, and the unusual thing about Dogger, which is why we went for it, is the entire site is protected, because you're protecting a habitat, which is one of the listed habitats under the directive. So the whole thing is protected. It's not just a couple of patches here and there. And that's why we were able to kick bottom trawling out and bottom impacting gears from the entire area in the UK. And the hope is, because it's exactly the same feature in Europe and they have the same rules and science is the same, that we can simply take that and apply that as far as trawling and dredging is concerned. With offshore wind, they should be compensating for the harm that they cause if they interfere with it. And of course, the other, Vincent's absolutely right. The MPA network, when I described what a marine protected area is, heritage and archaeology isn't in there. We could have put it in there when we wrote the legislation. We probably should have done, but we just didn't.
Yeah. There's also something else which is worth noting about the sheer scale and nature of development, which is changing. Yeah. 20 years ago, when we started doing the work out in the Dogger in the southern North Sea, we were primarily dealing with oil and gas, which in scalar terms, whatever you think about anything else, was relatively low impact, relatively. Wind farms are different. There are vast infrastructure cable networks associated with those pylons. You may just see the bits pointing up out of the sea, but there's a lot more going on below the sea as well. You've got the impact of scouring from the pylons. We do not
changing the whole system.
The whole ecosystem is going to change. It will also be exclusive. It's going to be exclusive, which is going to be a problem, certainly with.
And it's going to be years of construction, and you're going to drive out all the marine mammals that you're supposed to be protecting there. There's going to be thousands of birds that are going to be killed. So it's a big issue. But another big issue is the licensing for oil and gas, which are just being increased inside this protected area. So you kick out one destructive industry only to kind of open it up for the other ones. And so you ask about the burden of proof. The burden of proof is with the authorities and with the sectors submitting their license. But in reality, if you look at it, we're, as NGOs, having to go through thousands of pages with very limited time and capacity and to show the ecological evidence why maybe we shouldn't be destroying this area, we should be protecting it. And that's just not how we should be doing it. So what we'll try, and this is me in Doggerland in the Netherlands, so what we are hoping to do is create a vision for this area to rewild the Dogger Bank and to flip the burden of proof. So to say, this is where we should be going with nature protection and restoration. Here's our plan, give us the license, and let's go ahead and do it, because it can be done and it should be done, because our ecosystems are collapsing on us and we're so dependent on them. And it's only going to get more impacts from climate change. I mean, this is the oxygen we breathe, right? We talked about forests, but 50 to 80% of our oxygen comes from the sea. We can't have these dead zones increasing. We need to start really taking care of the marine ecosystems. And it may seem far away, but it's so close when you think about it. So I'm really hopeful actually, that across the borders we can work together to not only work for climate, for biodiversity, but also to preserve our, cultural heritage and our archaeology. It's so important.
There's another point here, which it may be lesser in some ways, but that's aggregate extraction from the sea. Bigger proportion of our aggregates is now coming from the sea. The aggregates, all that gravel which is being pumped into roads and surfaces everywhere, I'd like to point out is actually the archaeology. Now, the best example of this is something called Area 240. Area 240 was a Neanderthal, about 250,000 years old, find out in off the east coast of Britain. The reason it was found was because a chef in Holland was walking over huge aggregate piles, and I mean mountains of aggregate, and he spotted 20 hand axes inside he must have had flint sensitive eyes, this bloke. I have met him, a remarkable guy. He just used to go out in his lunchtime and do this, and it was tracked back to one point where an extant Neanderthal landscape was actually found about 11, 12 miles off the shore. But it's pure luck. It's pure luck. I mean, because most of the time people were looking at this stuff after it had been granulated. The chances of finding it would have been zero if it wasn't for a chef.
Okay, so that Emilie, I want to ask you all, and all of you, so what is the status of protecting this portion of Dogger Bank? How is your campaign going? Where are you in terms of legal action? You know, what can we expect, or what's
this year's
planned?
So this year is important to us because we've been preparing a lot of the legal procedures to ensure we effectively protect not only the Dogger Bank, but also other areas, Clover Bank, Frisian Front. These are massively important areas. And so we're, on the one hand, preparing all the legal procedures for that to make sure that, our laws, our legislation is effectively upheld and these areas are protected. That's what we see as kind of the minimal obligation. And then we're also preparing our plans for rewilding the area, creating this vision, also with other disciplines like archaeology. What do we need for this area for the next 10, 50, 100 years to make sure our ecosystems thrive? And so we're preparing that vision and plan this year. And then hopefully we'll be able to do the first big projects in 2025.
Charles, I want to ask you, because you have experience in raising funding to enforce other marine protected areas. So when you say you have a plan to rewild, I mean, is that something you can just leave it alone, or what actually needs to be implemented so that you can rewild such a vast territory? What does that entail?
Well, I think Tom will disagree if I've got this wrong. When we started out, we thought that passive rewilding was all we could hope for, that just leave it alone for long enough and nature will come back. But we have, as a result of this process and as a result of the expedition which Emilie organized to go and look at it, it's like the M25 out there. You are going to have to create space for nature, even in a marine protected area. We're going to have to do something active. And we hadn't quite realized that, and this is our experience. And we need now to say to government, because I'm not convinced they're doing this, are you looking where you tread? Demonstrate to us. We have borne witness to what's going on there. Emilie's demonstrated recovery. We've had the cameras on the seabed far longer than the government agencies have. Are you looking what you're treading on, both archaeologically and ecologically? Show us that you have looked. Show us that you have thought about it. Rishi Sunak has announced the largest wind farm in the world on the Dogger Bank at COP28. Does he have any idea what the ecological implications of that are? No. Were they considered? Were they considered as a whole? No, they weren't. They were cheese-paired. They were considered, one site at a time. And what are we doing? And how much effort should we be putting in to rectify that?
Yeah, I think that from our point as well, there's two ways of doing this. It's the litigation in the Netherlands. We've got an office. We've got people in Brussels as well. So we'll be putting Brussels domestically in the Netherlands and Germany, in Brussels and in the United Kingdom. But also, I really like this proposal. And this is what we're working at the moment. Is just renting some of it. So we get in there, because at the moment, we've done that on land. We've the National Trust and been buying property for years and making sure that that's protected in some way. And that's a really good way of controlling it. So one of the things that we're looking at is if we can find a bit that's cross-border as well, so that Emilie Doggerland can do some stuff in the Netherlands, we can do some stuff in the UK. If we can find a patch, a sweet spot there, and say, look, okay, we'll put a, it'll be inside the Dogger Bank itself, but it'll still be an area that we can start to kind of focus around and build a story up around and that. So that's one of our, it's a kind of carrot and stick, I suppose. The litigation.
Sounds expensive, Tom, but I like
it's only a lease.
Ambitious solution.
People are very willing to fund this.
Yeah.
This is 60 miles off Yorkshire. This is just off East Anglia. This is a place that nobody goes except wind farm developers and oil men. And we are increasingly reclaiming in the way that Vincent's talking about. We are beginning to realize this is part of our environment too. We need to bear witness to what's going on there. We need to say we want it to be done well.
I mean, I think it all's just worth emphasising the sheer size of this. The protected area, the UK bit, is half the size of Wales. So that action, when we removed the trawlers from it, was one of the largest single actions
Interventions made
we've
in
ever
the last
done, I
50
think.
years.
No, it's a fantastic
But it took
precedent.
us 10 plus years to get there. And so that's, and that's what I'm really excited about, that there's a bunch of people that are willing to work across the boundaries and to find each other. I mean, we did that work on doing an appropriate assessment the way it should be done, using the methodology according to law. So we worked relentlessly for 10 plus years to provide the evidence and to just keep going. And at some point you think like, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen. And it happened. And I think that was a real victory, finally, for NGOs to say, okay, well, but that's the first step. And now we need to look at all the other destructive sectors. And so you have to keep and this is a protected area. Look, what are we going to do outside of those protected areas? I mean, so there's a lot of work to do. So I'm hoping we're inspiring a lot of
you're inspiring everybody in this room.
Conservationists as well.
I think, Dana, it's very much about the sheer bloody-mindedness of certain individuals, which have really brought their lives, passion to bear on these intractable problems. So, everyone's hats off to you guys. And I think that to finish off before we take questions, so if I'm a consumer and citizen, Charles, what do I want to get out of this panel?
I think just the knowledge of what it's like to go there because nobody has told you, and the quandaries that we face, and the possibility and the opportunity that we now face. We don't want to be talking about this, as Emilie says, in 10 years' time. We want to talk about this now. The opportunities will have gone in 10 years' time. This wall of wind turbines was just coming towards us. These great platforms with cranes the size of the Eiffel Tower were bringing this whole wall of wind power towards us. What was it treading on? Where was it going? Ask the government. Yeah. Ask people you know. Ask important people. What's going on out there? Show us it's being done right. And look, there is opportunity here.
I want to point out that Charles's book is brilliant because also it contains many of his triumphs. And I think in a bleak landscape of climate change, I think this book is important also because it really does show that organizations like these can genuinely make a big, big material difference. On that note, let's take some questions. Okay.
Wow.
I'm going to take, there's a lot. I'm going to start. The mic is going to start on this side of the room, so.
Thanks, Joe. So a lot of the dialogue with the legalese with EU and the government's obviously happened. Wind farm contracts are going to go to large Ørsted. What conversations have happened at that level with the corporations, and are they aware?
Well, funnily enough, Blue has been having those conversations for some time. We get on rather well with Ørsted. We were going to do an oyster restoration off the Blackwater. We chose an area, Complete Sands, I think it was, and we looked at it together with Ørsted. There was some complication about the hydrology. The hydrologist didn't think that the oyster spat would stay there, would rest there, though the old oyster fishermen told us it would. Ørsted and I thought that it would, but the hydrologist said it was all wrong, so we had to pull that one. So we decided instead to look at all sorts of places. There is Blue has a blueprint, if you like, for where you could do work with wind farmers. We've got them on side. We're having the discussion.
Yeah, and can I just come back on that, on Hinkley Point nuclear power station, where they tried to basically say the power station had zero impact on another marine protected area, even though they were creating the largest river in England.
That's for you.
In fact, largest river in the UK. We can't stop that kind of development. In law, they have as overriding public interest, but we can make sure they do compensation, and we can and we should make sure that conversation is not just lip service. It is actually something that materially, because you can just create specious sort of projects in the air. We can and should make sure those things are meaningful, and there are things you can do to restore the marine environment as well. So there's that conversation which is ongoing with them, and having sort of tripped up EDF. We're on reasonable terms with them now because they tried to sort of pretend it wasn't And now we're having a conversation as they realise the law did actually apply to them. So
Tom basically won the public inquiry. They had to pay attention.
Okay,
Lots of
next
questions.
question.
Yeah.
In the middle there. Wait for the mic, please.
I was rather surprised to find in an article in The Guardian that the Crown Estate owns the land around the coast. You haven't mentioned them at all, yet our King Charles is supposed to be a conservationist, etc., etc. Where do they fit in with all of this?
Well, the king had the Crown Estate taken off him in the 1760s or 70s, George III, when he went mad. So the king is not, as far as we know, responsible for this, though he is very willing to take a benign view, much more so than the Crown Estate. Cue Tom.
Yeah, so the Crown Estate, how long have you got on the Crown Estate? So the Crown Estate it does own the seabed. They do have obligations. What they do is they try and say, well, that's all dealt with through the licensing process, and our obligation really is to get as much money out of this as possible, and then make sure the environmental and archaeological issues are dealt with by the developer. So they're kind of an absentee landowner, but we are definitely trying to push them to be more active than they are in terms of managing this estate, which is massive. Particularly as they're now, in the old days, they didn't make any money out of it, so they sort of thought it a bit of the Cinderella part of their estate. Now they're making vast fortunes of it because of licensing the wind. So yes, they have a very important role in this.
The young lady right next to her.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you still had the mic. Sorry.
How do you propose to regulate Dogger Bank and other protected areas around the UK?
That was the substance of this discussion. Do you want to?
Well,
Do you mean
just answer that in a sentence.
Yeah, no, the Marine Management Organisation is currently, because Dogger Bank was one of many.
It's the first of many.
It's the first of many. There's 40 offshore sites. The Dogger was the biggest, and they are now consulting on measures for all of them.
On bylaws.
On bylaws for fisheries in particular. And that, again, was one of the win of that case, is that we didn't just win Dogger, we actually won the whole strategic mitigation is what it's called. We won something around the whole of the UK, and those are being consulted on at the moment. And we have an undertaking that that's going to be done within the next 18 months, don't we? Otherwise we're going to sue them.
But the issue with enforcement is that, so the national government, so the Dogger Bank spans across the UK, the Netherlands and Germany, and also Denmark, but they haven't designated it. But our governments are supposed to enforce the Birds and Habitats Directive. And so they need to keep eyes on the area, and they're not. And this is where we come in, where we're kind of the watchdog of the watchdog. So we make sure that, we keep an eye on whether the little bit of regulation that's been put into place, those measures, those little bits and pieces, will also effectively be implemented. So unfortunately, that's also something that we have to look at. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. Actually, the very last row. This is somebody who has never asked a question. The very top man.
Really useful.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if you could frame how significant Dogger Bank is in terms of a nursery for North Sea fish species. So, what's the win-win outcome of this in terms of, biodiversity, replenishment of fish stocks? What's the upside from getting this right? I mean, it's obviously huge, given you mentioned the deterioration in sort of catches, etc. But looking at where it is and topographically, you would think that this is probably one of the most significant nursery areas in the North Sea, and therefore of vital importance for the whole EU.
Should I?
Yeah, you're
okay. Yeah, this is actually the reason. It's very, very important, this area, and we refer to it as the ecological heart of the North Sea. And so to resuscitate this heart will be immensely important to the entire North Sea. There's a reason why it's been so degraded for centuries, because it was one of the more productive areas. It's because of where these water masses collide and all the nutrients come up, and it's feeding from the seabed up to the birds, everything. If we allow it to just have space and quiet to restore, I think we will see kind of an ecological wonder emerge in the next decades because of its properties that it will still have, its central location, its hydrology, everything. But we need to make sure that we allow it to restore itself. And that's a big concern for us right now that we will be working very hard towards.
There is a paper, Callum Roberts's, Plummeridge and Roberts' paper it's called about shifting baselines of how we fish down the food web. But also that can happen in reverse, and how quickly we'll respond to measures if we leave it alone.
We will quickly see all the fish come back, and the sand eels and the cod and whiting and every species that is spawning. And we during our expedition, vast amounts of the Dogger Bank are barren, they're desert, they're just degraded. And then all of a sudden you'll find a pocket of hope where there hasn't been any trawling in the past decades. We looked at the data, so we know this. And they're shark eggs, so they're still sharks. And when I go diving on the wrecks, I see octopus, I see squid eggs. So there's still species out there that are kind of, waiting for us to release all the human pressures and to just allow that area to thrive, because we're already using 100% of the North Sea. We don't need to. We can allow certain areas we can allow nature to restore itself.
Okay, fantastic. All of you, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.